I was wondering if you could maybe teach me a little physics.
A little physics? There's no such thing. Physics encompasses the entire universe, from quantum particles to supernovas, from spinning electrons to spinning galaxies.
The Big Bang Theory ran for 12 seasons on CBS, pulling in audiences of more than 20 million viewers per episode at its peak, and becoming one of the most watched sitcoms in television history. But behind the laugh tracks and the whiteboard equations sat a show that repeatedly collided with censors, cultural expectations, and its own creative choices. 3 episodes, in particular, stand apart from the rest of the run, not for their ratings or their Emmy nominations, but for the fact that they were banned. Why did that happen? In this video, we'll find out. Come along, the unaired pilot that was buried before the show even began. The story of The Big Bang Theory's most suppressed content begins not midway through its run, but at the very start, before the show had a single episode on the air. In 2006, creators Chuck Lorre and Bill Prady produced a pilot for the 2006 to 2007 broadcast season that CBS declined to pick up. The network's rejection was not framed as a polite pass on a show with potential. It was a fundamental objection to the tone and content of what had been submitted. According to the show's documented history, the original pilot featured only 2 core cast members, Jim Parsons as Sheldon Cooper and Johnny Galecki as Leonard Hofstadter, alongside 2 female characters named Katie and Gilda, who bore almost no resemblance to the women who would eventually populate the show. Katie, played by actress Amanda Walsh, was written as street-hardened and openly sexual in ways that the network found uncomfortable. Gilda, played by Iris Barr, was a neighbor who existed primarily as a foil. Neither character survived into the version of the show that eventually aired. The unaired pilot opened with a scene that became the defining reason the episode was rejected and later buried. Leonard and a version of Sheldon who bore very little resemblance to the asexual, rigidly intellectual character audiences came to know went to a high IQ sperm bank together, seeking to earn money by donating. The scene was not played for the gentle fish-out-of-water comedy that defined the aired series. In the unaired version, Sheldon made explicit reference to the type of adult material he had used in preparing his donation. The language was crude in ways that conflicted with everything the eventual show became known for. CBS looked at those scenes and told Lorre and Prady that the sexual content had to go entirely, along with most of the female characters and the entire tone surrounding the opening sequence. Chuck Lorre addressed this directly in Jessica Radloff's 2022 oral history, The Big Bang Theory, the definitive inside story of the epic hit series. In the book, Lorre acknowledged that he was slow to understand what the show actually was. He said the sexual content had to go, and that it was not until the second season that he fully understood Sheldon Cooper's asexuality as a defining trait. The unaired pilot represented a version of the show where that understanding had not yet arrived. Sheldon, in the 2006 version, was a man who referenced adult content casually and discussed female anatomy in ways that would have been completely unrecognizable to the fans who later made the show a global phenomenon. The contrast between the 2 pilots extends beyond Sheldon's characterization. The female lead in the unaired version, Katie, was conceived as a damaged woman with a tough exterior. She had been kicked out of her apartment after her boyfriend revealed he was married. Her mother refused to take her in because of an ongoing affair with her stepfather. She ended up moving in with Leonard and Sheldon over Sheldon's strong objections, and the dynamic between the 3 of them was driven by conflict and a kind of cynical edge that had nothing in common with the warmth that defined the Leonard and Penny relationship once Kaylee Cuoco joined the cast. The character of Howard Wolowitz did not exist yet. Raj Koothrappali, did not exist yet. The show that CBS eventually greenlit for the 2007 season was a substantially different program built on a completely different emotional foundation. The theme music was different too. The 2006 pilot used Thomas Dolby's 1982 hit "She Blinded Me with Science" as its opening track, a choice that fit the show's original framing as a more ironic, adult-oriented comedy. The Bare Naked Ladies song that became one of the most recognizable television theme tunes of the decade did not arrive until the show had been reworked from the ground up. The very identity of the program, right down to its sonic packaging, had to be reconstructed almost entirely before the network was willing to commit to a series order. CBS did not simply allow Laurie and Prati to retool the pilot quietly and move on. The network's objections were significant enough that the unaired version essentially ceased to exist from an official standpoint. It was never broadcast. It was never made available on streaming platforms in any official capacity. The scenes involving Sheldon's behavior at the sperm bank were suppressed entirely. Even after the show became a cultural institution that generated billions of dollars in licensing, merchandise, and syndication revenue, the unaired pilot remained something the network wanted to keep at a distance, rather than celebrate as a curiosity from the show's history. What makes the suppression of the unaired pilot particularly interesting is that the sperm bank scene did not disappear entirely when the show eventually aired. The 2007 pilot that audiences saw still opened with Leonard and Sheldon visiting the high IQ sperm bank, but the version of the scene that made it into the broadcast pilot was almost entirely stripped of the material that had caused the 2006 version to be rejected. In the aired version, the two characters helped the receptionist solve a crossword puzzle rather than engaging in the explicit behavior that characterized the earlier draft. The scene's purpose shifted from crass comedy to a gentle illustration of how incapable these two men were of normal social functioning. The sperm bank became a setting for social awkwardness rather than a setup for sexual humor. But even that cleaned-up version of the sperm bank scene eventually ran into trouble. Years into the show's syndication run, Chuck Lorre made the decision to remove the opening sperm bank sequence from the aired pilot entirely. It was cut from syndicated broadcasts and from certain airline versions of the episode, though it remained available on the Max streaming version of the show. Laurie explained his reasoning in Radloff's oral history, saying that, in his mind, the show truly began with the awkward hellos between Penny, Sheldon, and Leonard when she was unpacking boxes in the hallway. The sperm bank scene, even in its sanitized form, no longer fit what the show had become or how Sheldon Cooper had been understood by audiences. Jim Parsons agreed with the removal. He said that, looking back, the scene was out of place, and that while the live audience accepted it for what it was at the time, it was confusing information in retrospect. He said he understood why Laurie had taken it out of syndication, because the episode was much stronger without it. The actor's agreement with the decision underlines how completely the character of Sheldon Cooper had evolved into something specific enough that even his earliest scenes no longer fit the mold. The result is a pilot episode that exists in multiple versions, none of which are the same. The 2006 pilot was never broadcast and was suppressed by the network on the grounds of inappropriate content. The 2007 pilot that audiences saw included a scene that was later removed from most of its distribution channels. And the version that streams today is a cleaned-up edition of an already cleaned-up edition, with the original material buried so thoroughly that most viewers have no idea the show nearly launched as an entirely different kind of program. That process of suppression and revision, from one rejected draft to a reimagined version to a further edited streaming copy, spans nearly 2 decades of a show working to manage its own early history. The unaired pilot also highlights how drastically the show's treatment of women changed between its 2006 conception and its eventual broadcast form. Katie was written as a woman defined by bad decisions, sexual availability, and a damaged past. The eventual Penny, as played by Kaylee Cuoco, was a woman with genuine aspiration, warmth, and a developing arc that took her from aspiring actress to pharmaceutical sales executive across the show's 12 seasons. The difference between the two characters is not just a matter of tone. It reflects a fundamental reconsideration of what role women were meant to play in the story, and how the show understood its own responsibility toward the people it put on screen. The Season 2 episode that triggered a legal notice 15 years after it aired. When The Bad Fish Paradigm first aired on September 22, 2008, it drew very little controversy. The episode was the Season 2 premiere of a show that was just beginning to find its audience and expand its cultural footprint. The plot centered on Penny feeling overwhelmed by Sheldon and telling Leonard's friends things about him that she had intended to keep quiet. There was a subplot involving Sheldon temporarily moving in with Raj after a disagreement, which led to a brief scene that nobody in the American media discussed at the time, and that would go largely unnoticed for more than a decade. In that scene, Sheldon and Raj watch a Bollywood film together and fall into a conversation about two of India's most celebrated actresses. Sheldon, displaying his characteristic dismissiveness toward anything he has not personally evaluated and approved, tells Raj that Aishwarya Rai is, in his assessment, a poor man's Madhuri Dixit. Raj, a devoted admirer of Rai, becomes furious and fires back that Aishwarya Rai is a goddess, and that, by comparison, Madhuri Dixit is a leprous prostitute. The live studio audience laughed at two socially awkward men arguing passionately about actresses they would never meet. The episode moved on, and the scene was forgotten by virtually everyone involved in its production. 15 years later, in March 2023, political analyst Mithun Vijay Kumar was watching the show on Netflix India when he came across the episode. Kumar had a representative send a formal legal notice to Netflix's Mumbai office, demanding the removal of the episode from the platform, describing the dialogue as defamatory, offensive toward Indian culture, and promoting sexism and discrimination against women. The legal notice was specific in its demands. Kumar wanted the episode gone from the Indian version of the Netflix catalog, or he would pursue further legal action against the streaming service. He shared his letter on the social platform formerly known as Twitter, writing that he had been deeply disturbed by the dialogue and found it highly derogatory and offensive toward Indian culture and women. The response from Netflix was measured and deflective. Rather than removing the episode or issuing a public statement defending its decision to keep it on the platform, Netflix directed Kumar toward Warner Brothers, the licensor of the show's content, and informed producers about the notice. Netflix did not take the episode down. Warner Brothers did not issue any statement about the matter. Neither Madhuri Dixit herself nor Aishwarya Rai, the two women at the center of the controversy, made any public comment about the 15-year-old scene. The complaint had arrived, been passed along, and produced no material change to what was available on the platform. The reaction from a segment of the public on social media was skeptical of Kumar's complaint. A number of responses pointed out that neither of the actresses in question had objected to the dialogue in 2008 or at any point in the years since. Others noted that the Indian actor Kunal Nayyar, who delivered the line as Raj, had never expressed discomfort with the material. The argument that a fictional character's insult of a real person constitutes defamation of that person was questioned by commentators who noted the significant difference between comedy and actual legal liability. As one response on the social platform pointed out, The line was clearly meant to illustrate Raj's overprotective devotion to Aishwarya Rai as a comic character trait, not to offer a genuine assessment of Madhuri Dixit's standing. But the existence of the legal notice and the fact that it attracted enough attention to be covered by major entertainment outlets, including Collider, Screen Rant, and Looper, pulled the episode into a different kind of light. The bad fish paradigm had always contained a line that was offensive in a way the American writers may not have fully considered. Raj's dialogue in the scene positioned him as furiously defending Aishwarya Rai by deploying language that degraded Madhuri Dixit in the most explicit possible terms. The joke worked, to the extent that it worked at all, by subverting the audience's expectation of which actress Raj would prefer. But the language used in the subversion was jarring in retrospect, and the fact that it emerged from the mouth of the show's only main Indian character added a layer of complexity that the writers almost certainly did not intend to create. The episode also drew attention to a broader criticism of how The Big Bang Theory handled its Indian representation across 12 seasons. Raj Koothrappali, despite being a core member of the main cast, was repeatedly written into situations that leaned on his cultural identity as a source of comedy rather than genuine character development. His selective mutism around women, played for laughs throughout the early seasons, was paired with a characterization that sometimes reduced his Indian background to a collection of recurring jokes about Bollywood preferences, arranged marriages, and the expectations of wealthy immigrant parents. The bad fish paradigm scene fit that pattern in a way that became harder to overlook once someone took the time to formally object. Netflix's handling of the situation was notable for what it did not do. The streaming platform did not remove the episode. It did not issue content warnings specifically about the scene in question. It did not commission any public statement from the show's producers or the relevant cast members. The episode remains available on streaming platforms to this day, with the dialogue intact. The legal notice filed by Kumar produced no actual alteration to the episode's availability, but it produced something else, a public record that the scene had been formally identified as problematic, and a renewed discussion about whether the show's treatment of its Indian lead character held up to the scrutiny of a more culturally aware audience years after the series ended. The gap between when an episode airs and when its most controversial content receives serious attention is not unique to The Big Bang Theory. But 15 years is a particularly dramatic illustration of how the streaming era has transformed the relationship between television history and cultural accountability. Episodes that aired once per week in 2008 and then effectively vanished from the public conversation are now available for anyone to encounter at any moment, on any device, in any country where that streaming platform operates. The complaints that did not arrive in 2008 can arrive in 2023, with the same force as if the episode had aired the previous Thursday, and with the added dimension that they now travel instantly across global social media platforms to attract coverage that the original broadcast never generated. The specifics of the legal notice also illuminate something about how international streaming has changed the cultural reach of American television. The Big Bang Theory was produced for an American broadcast audience by American writers, with cultural reference points that the show's domestic viewers were expected to parse on their own terms. But streaming distribution means those same episodes now reach audiences in India, where Madhuri Dixit is not a distant cultural reference, but a national icon whose reputation carries real weight. What read as an absurdist exchange between two geeky characters for the show's American audience lands in an entirely different context for an Indian viewer encountering the same dialogue on Netflix India. The Season 10 episode that got banned in the United Kingdom. By the time The Big Bang Theory reached its 10th season in the 2016 to 2017 broadcast year, it had settled into the kind of comfortable institutional familiarity that comes with a show that has been running for nearly a decade. The ratings remained strong, the characters were beloved, and the show had long since established itself as a family-adjacent sitcom that parents and children could watch together without significant concern. It was not the kind of program that made advertisers nervous or gave network standards departments much reason to intervene. That reputation made what happened with Season 10, Episode 7, titled The Veracity Elasticity, all the more unexpected in both the UK and across the entertainment press that covered the fallout. The episode itself centered on two parallel plots involving deception within the group's relationships. Amy had been lying to Sheldon about the repairs to her apartment having been completed, allowing her to continue living with him, while Penny had been secretly moving Leonard's beloved collectibles into storage and replacing them with her own decorating choices. When Leonard discovered Penny's secret, he confronted her, and they reached a compromise. When Sheldon discovered Amy's secret, the consequences played out across his characteristically rigid sense of order. Both storylines were conventional Big Bang Theory territory, built on the familiar architecture of the show's relationship dynamics and the particular kind of comedy that emerges when highly logical people encounter emotional deception. But embedded within the episode was a dream sequence belonging to Sheldon that stepped well outside the show's usual comfort zone. In the sequence, Sheldon wakes in the middle of the night feeling anxious about the plan to repurpose his old bedroom now that he and Amy are living together. He goes to check on the room and hears techno music playing behind the closed door. When he opens it, he finds Leonard and Penny inside, but not in any configuration the show had ever depicted before. The room has been transformed into a red-lit adult playground. Leonard is shirtless, wearing a leather harness and a collar, and is handcuffed to a St. Andrew's cross. Penny is dressed in a dominatrix-style corset with a revealing neckline and a fetish cap. The whole scene plays as Sheldon's worst nightmare about what the group might do with a space he had considered sacred. The scene was played entirely for comedy. Its purpose was to visualize Sheldon's anxieties about the fate of his former sanctuary in the most absurd terms possible. And the joke landed on the dissonance between the show's clean-cut regulars and the imagery surrounding them. The writers were drawing on a straightforward comedic logic. Sheldon's fears are always disproportionate to reality, and the dream illustrated that disproportionality in the most visually striking way the writers could devise. For the American audience that watched it on CBS, the sequence registered as a funny and mildly surprising departure from the show's usual visual language. But UK advertisers, who reviewed the episode before it went to air, took a different view entirely. The British broadcasting context for a show like The Big Bang Theory operated on the assumption that the program would remain within certain content parameters, and the BDSM dream sequence fell outside those parameters in a way the advertisers were not willing to accommodate. British commercial television operates under a framework where advertisers have significant influence over the content they sponsor, and a family sitcom associated with their brands appearing to endorse or depict sexual fetish content was not something they were prepared to support. The result was that the dream sequence was cut entirely from the version of The Veracity Elasticity that aired in the United Kingdom. The episode was broadcast, but it was not broadcast in the form its American audience had seen. The scene that had drawn advertiser objections was removed from the UK version, leaving a structural gap in the episode's middle section that the rest of the plot was expected to bridge without it. The removal was reported by British media, including The Mirror. which described the scene as one that advertisers had deemed too hot for the UK broadcast of the episode. The coverage from British outlets framed the situation in somewhat tabloid terms, focusing heavily on Kayleigh Cuoco's costume in the sequence, and characterizing the advertiser reaction primarily as a response to the revealing nature of her outfit. But the actual mechanism of the ban was more institutional than personal. British advertisers for a family-positioned sitcom had not expected to encounter BDSM content when they previewed the upcoming episode, and when they did, they exercised the commercial leverage that allows advertising partners to influence what actually reaches a broadcast audience. The scene was gone before the episode aired, and the UK audience that watched the broadcast version of The Veracity Elasticity saw a somewhat different episode than the one Chuck Lorre's team had produced. What makes the situation particularly telling is the way it exposed the gap between what The Big Bang Theory presented itself as and what it occasionally allowed itself to become. The show's entire brand was built on the idea that it was a safe space for comedy about smart people with unusual interests. The laugh track, the familiar apartment set, the clearly defined character archetypes, all of it communicated a kind of predictability that made the show feel like a reliable choice for general audiences across multiple countries. One dream sequence involving Leonard and Penny in fetish gear was enough to shatter that predictability entirely for a specific group of commercial partners in the United Kingdom. The Season 10 episode also brought renewed attention to the prior personal relationship between Johnny Galecki and Kayleigh Cuoco. The two actors had dated from 2007 to 2009, before ending their relationship and continuing to work together on the show for the remaining decade of its run. UK press coverage of the banned scene noted that biographical context prominently, adding a layer of tabloid interest to what was fundamentally an advertiser content decision. The actors themselves had long since moved forward from any personal complications, and both had married other people by the time the Season 10 episode aired. But the British media's framing of the story kept the biographical detail present in a way that American coverage largely avoided. The decision to shoot the controversial sequence as a dream gave the production an option that a real scene would not have provided. Because Sheldon's nightmare about the room was a self-contained visual joke rather than a plot-necessary scene, the UK version of the episode could remove it without losing the thread of either storyline. The Amy and Penny deceptions both resolved through dialogue and character interaction rather than through anything that depended on the dream sequence. The emotional beats of the episode remained intact, even with the sequence gone. From a production standpoint, the scene was structured in a way that made it easily detachable, which suggests either a degree of anticipation on the part of the writers about how the content might be received internationally, or simply good fortune in how the material happened to be assembled. The episode aired in the United States with the sequence intact and performed solidly. Season 10 as a whole drew consistent ratings throughout its run, and The Veracity Elasticity was watched by just over 14 million viewers in its initial American broadcast. The controversy in the United Kingdom generated coverage internationally, but did not affect the show's standing with American audiences, who saw the complete version of the episode without any alteration. The broader significance of what happened with The Veracity Elasticity sits in what it revealed about the international distribution of American television content and the assumptions embedded in that distribution. A scene that passed CBS Standards and Practices review in the United States, that drew no objections from any American advertiser, and that aired without incident to one of the most watched audiences in primetime television, was simultaneously considered inappropriate for broadcast in the United Kingdom without cuts. The different thresholds for content in different markets are not a new phenomenon in the television industry. But having a show as mainstream and deliberately inoffensive as The Big Bang Theory collide with those thresholds made the collision considerably more visible than it would have been with a program that was already known for pushing boundaries. The show continued for 2 more seasons after The Veracity Elasticity and ended in May 2019 with a finale that drew over 18 million viewers in the United States. Its spin-off, Young Sheldon, ran successfully on CBS until 2024, extending the universe Laurie and Brady had created with their 2007 relaunch. The UK band Dream sequence remains in the American streaming version of the show on Max, where it is available to any subscriber regardless of geography, rendering the British ban a regional footnote rather than a permanent suppression. But the British edit of the episode, stripped of the sequence that caused advertiser objections, represents a version of the show that its own creators never intended for that audience to encounter. The 3 episodes examined here tell a connected story about a show that was more complicated than its warm, approachable exterior suggested across its 12-year run. The suppressed 2006 pilot showed a creative team that had not yet understood what their own show was supposed to be, and a network that imposed that understanding through outright rejection. The 2008 episode that attracted a legal notice 15 years after it aired showed how comedy that seemed harmless in one cultural moment and one geographic context can read entirely differently in another, particularly when streaming platforms give every episode an indefinite and globally distributed afterlife. And the 2016 episode that was edited for British broadcast showed how a show operating in one cultural context is always simultaneously operating in every other context where its content can be received, whether its creators account for that reality or not. The Big Bang Theory became what it became in part because of everything it chose not to be and was forced not to be. The unaired pilot represents the road the show did not take. Discarded at the network's insistence before a single episode reached an audience. The legal controversy around the Season 2 premiere shows a joke the show probably should not have made, whose consequences arrived years too late to prompt any internal revision. And the UK ban on the Season 10 Dream sequence shows the limits of assuming that a program belongs only to the audience and the regulatory environment that created it. The show's global reach was its greatest commercial achievement. It was also the reason these 3 episodes could not simply be left alone. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.